We begin today by confronting a profound paradox, one that challenges the very heart of faith itself. It is a tension that exists between the highest ideals and the often stark realities of human behavior. This paradox compels us to look deeply into our convictions and actions. This is the paradox of faith, the striking disconnect between teachings of boundless love, profound compassion, and unwavering justice, and the observable actions of those who profess these very beliefs. It is a chasm that demands our critical attention and honest reflection. How can such a gap persist between what is preached and what is practiced? This question is not merely academic. It touches upon the integrity of faith and its relevance in a complex world. It calls for a radical re-evaluation of empathy. At the core of this paradox lies a stark contrast. We observe a significant divergence between central Christian teachings and the actual actions, or inactions, of many adherents. This discrepancy is both perplexing and deeply troubling. The foundational principle of Christian ethics is encapsulated in the Great Commandment. Jesus declared that the greatest commands are to love God with all your being and to love your neighbor as yourself. This dual mandate forms the bedrock of faith. The definition of neighbor is crucial here. The parable of the Good Samaritan unequivocally expands this concept. A neighbor is anyone in need, including those considered societal or ethnic outsiders, even traditional enemies. The Sermon on the Mount further articulates this radical ethic. Jesus blesses the poor in spirit, the meek, those who mourn, and those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. He exalts the merciful, the pure in heart, and the peacemakers. His teachings call for extraordinary acts of compassion. We are instructed to turn the other cheek, to go the extra mile, and perhaps most challenging of all, to love our enemies. These are not suggestions, but core tenets. The very life of Jesus serves as the ultimate example. His ministry was characterized by radical inclusion and profound compassion for the marginalized. He consistently ministered to outcasts, including the poor, the sick, lepers, tax collectors, and prostitutes. He broke social conventions and religious norms to extend grace and healing. His interactions consistently demonstrated a profound empathy for human suffering and a challenge to oppressive systems. His life was a living testament to radical love. Perhaps the most potent articulation of this doctrine comes from the judgment of the nations in Matthew chapter 25. Here, salvation is explicitly determined by one's care for the most vulnerable members of society. Jesus states, "Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." This passage directly links acts of compassion and justice to one's relationship with the divine. It is a powerful and unambiguous declaration. Despite these clear and compelling teachings, we frequently observe a troubling lack of empathy in practice. This manifests in various ways within communities of faith. Consider the political support often given to policies that actively cut social safety nets. These policies disproportionately harm the poor and vulnerable, directly contradicting the call to care for the least of these. We also witness widespread hostility towards immigrants and refugees. These are often the very strangers, hungry and naked, whom Jesus commanded us to welcome and assist. The rhetoric can be harsh and exclusionary. There is also a tendency towards judgment and condemnation of individuals in difficult circumstances. Poverty, addiction, or mental illness are often attributed to personal failings rather than systemic issues or complex life struggles. This often includes blaming poverty on laziness or moral deficiency. Such attitudes actively erode empathy, replacing compassion with a self-righteous judgment that stands in stark contrast to Jesus' example. Furthermore, there is often an overwhelming focus on personal piety and sexual morality. While these have their place, they frequently overshadow the explicit commands for social justice, radical compassion, and care for the marginalized. The emphasis shifts from outward acts of love for neighbor to inward self-preservation or adherence to specific moral codes. This imbalance distorts the holistic message of faith. The disconnect we observe is complex. It is not simply a matter of straightforward hypocrisy. Instead, it involves a confluence of psychological, sociological, and theological factors that shape human behavior and belief. One significant factor is the prevalence of certain theological and interpretive filters. These lenses can inadvertently obscure or diminish the radical call to empathy. A common filter is an overemphasis on salvation theology. This perspective often prioritizes individual, otherworldly salvation above all else. It can overshadow the clear, this-worldly commands for social justice and compassionate action. The focus becomes solely on securing one's eternal destiny, rather than living out the implications of faith in the present. This can lead to a neglect of earthly suffering. Another powerful distortion is the prosperity gospel. This theology posits that wealth and health are direct divine rewards for faith. Conversely, poverty or misfortune are often seen as indicators of a lack of faith or divine disfavor. This creates a just world fallacy, where suffering is perceived as deserved. It actively erodes empathy by suggesting that those who suffer are somehow responsible for their plight, thus absolving others of responsibility. Finally, selective literalism plays a role. Adherents may focus intensely on specific scriptural passages, often those pertaining to personal conduct or doctrinal purity. At the same time, they may ignore or downplay direct and unambiguous commands for justice, care for the poor, and radical love for the stranger. This selective approach creates an incomplete and imbalanced understanding of faith. Sociological and tribal factors also profoundly influence the expression of empathy. Human beings are inherently social creatures, often driven by group identity. There is a strong tendency for Christian identity to become intertwined with specific political or cultural identities. This alignment can lead to a conflation of faith with partisan agendas or nationalistic sentiments. Consequently, empathy often becomes directed inward, primarily towards the in-group or those who share similar political and cultural views. It is then withheld from perceived out-group threats or those who hold differing ideologies. This tribalism can lead to cognitive dissonance. Individuals may hold conflicting ideas, such as identifying as a compassionate Christian, while simultaneously supporting policies that cause harm. To resolve this dissonance, a common psychological mechanism is to dehumanize the less fortunate or the other. This allows individuals to maintain their self-perception of compassion while supporting harmful actions. Moral foundations theory offers further insight. Different individuals and groups prioritize different moral foundations. While some emphasize care and fairness, others may prioritize loyalty, authority, or sanctity. When loyalty to a group or authority figures takes precedence, the universal call to empathy can be diminished. The moral compass shifts from universal compassion to group cohesion. Beyond theological and sociological factors, inherent psychological and empathic gaps also contribute to the paradox. These are aspects of human nature that make radical empathy challenging. One such gap is compassion fatigue and distance. The sheer scale of global problems, such as poverty, war, or natural disasters, can feel overwhelming and abstract. When problems feel distant or too large to solve, practical empathy becomes difficult to sustain. The emotional burden can lead to a desensitization or a sense of helplessness. Another significant psychological bias is the fundamental attribution error. This is the tendency to attribute others' misfortunes to their character flaws or personal choices. Conversely, we tend to excuse our own failures or difficulties by attributing them to external circumstances. This bias makes it easy to judge others harshly while being lenient with ourselves. This error allows individuals to rationalize why others suffer, thereby reducing their own perceived responsibility to act. It creates a barrier to genuine understanding and compassionate response. The paradox we have explored is not an indictment of faith itself, but rather a profound reflection of human nature. It reveals the complex interplay of our ideals, our biases, and our social conditioning. For critics, this paradox reveals the powerful influence of tribalism, political alignment, and cognitive bias on human behavior. It underscores how easily noble intentions can be subverted. For believers, however, it serves as a prophetic challenge and an urgent call to self-examination. It demands an honest reckoning with how closely our lives align with the radical teachings we profess. The struggle to close the gap between professing faith and practicing radical empathy is perhaps the central and most difficult work of a genuine spiritual life. It is a lifelong journey of introspection and action. This journey requires a constant reevaluation of our priorities, a willingness to challenge our own biases, and a renewed commitment to the transformative power of unconditional love. It is a call to live out our deepest convictions,